Hi card makers, I'm Tricia at Club Scrap with the Farmstand Card Kit. We're going to be making a dozen cards today with this beautiful collection. I'm just going to start out by setting aside all the wonderful embellishments that we've included with this kit. And we are going to put everything in the order that we need to trim it, and that includes doing a little trimming on this guy as well. So don't let me forget about that. Our first piece of paper that we will trim, and it helps if you hold the paper kind of in the crook of your arm so you can see the colors from the top. I'm going to find one red plain and place that on my trimmer base, followed by a dark green. Now you will notice that with this dark green paper there is a burlappy texture on this. I'm going to put that texture side face down. Just, ultimately just be mindful that when you're scoring and folding your paper, it does have a right and wrong side. Then I'm going to choose one orange plain. This is one of my favorite oranges, not too bright, not too dull. And then a light green. Next, find one sheet of the ivory, another dark green. I'll put that texture side down. Then an orange and a light green. Then find the other ivory and the other red. And we'll finish with two prints and then the cut-aparts. So those cut-aparts we're going to be doing first the one that has the little red pepper on it with the hot stuff, or the chili pepper. And then the other one that has the pumpkin. So put those face down and flip everything back over to the top red piece that we found first. Now again, I have a copy of the instructions, and if you have this kit, you'll have the ability to download your own copy. You can either look at it from a device or print it. And then I'm also using our accordion pocket file. If you don't have one of these, I suggest that you maintain 4 piles during this workshop, A, B, C, and D. And then the A, B, C piles are for the actual materials needed for each set of 4 cards. And the D pile is where I put the unused pieces that I can use at my discretion later on if I wish when I'm completing my cards. So this little flap on the accordion pocket file tucks underneath the base of my trimmer. And this accordion pocket file is something that you can make if you find access to my instructional video, and I do have a starter kit available for purchase as well. So this is an extremely helpful tool. You only need to make one every few years as they wear. It's just paper, but it's a wonderful tool to help you follow my method, my efficient method of card making. So with that said, I think we're going to go right ahead and trim this little guy. This is a 6-inch length, and what I want to do is create several half-inch pieces. So to do that, I'm going to place this horizontally into my trimmer, and instead of cutting into half-inch over here, we're going to just subtract a half-inch from every measurement. So we're going to go 5.5, 5, 4.5, 4, 3.5, 3, 2.5, 2. So we just made a total of 8 of these little pieces, and later on they're going to perform as a stopper in one of our card sets. That's going to be set B. So if you want, you can go ahead and place these in the B pocket, up to you. This is just a little remnant. It just gives you something to hang on to when you're trimming those small pieces. Another piece of important advice is that you just always make sure you're pressing down on that clear bar when you're trimming smaller things like this especially, but do it every cut, absolutely every cut without fail. Okay, so now we're on to the actual trimming of the materials for the cards. I'm going to find the grain direction. If you're new here, to find grain, you want to hold the paper by an edge and study whether or not it's loose and flexible or if it's really stiff. So in this case, you see how droopy the paper is? It bends easily in this direction. If I rotate a quarter turn, it fights me. And really, I can feel a huge difference. So make sure the grain of the paper is running in this direction, dipping easily left to right, and that will change from diagram to diagram. Then I'm going to do the same thing with that next piece of green. See how stiff this is? It bends nice and easily from left to right. And And that just simply means that in the future, we'll be making some folds on this paper, and we'll be folding with the grain, which is what you always want. And I'm sure you've probably experienced folding against the grain. It's not fun, and it's not very pretty either. So let's trim this at 6 3/4. So I'm going to find 6, go to the left 3 vertical columns, so 6 3/4. Stabilize firmly on that clear bar, especially when you're trimming 2 pieces of paper at the same time. Now rotate the piece in your base, and we'll cut at 9 1/2 and 4 3/4. Okay, so that gives me 2 sets of card bases here for set B. So I'm going to file those in the pocket labeled B. And then I have this rectangular strip remaining. I'm going to trim this at 4 1/2 and 2 1/4. Now this should have created a total of 6 pieces. They're all the same size, and these are used on the slimline cards in set C. Next, I'll take the remaining strips and place them horizontally in my trimmer. Our first cut's at 11, then 8 1/2, 6, and 3. Okay, so this 3-inch piece and then the other pair of 3-inch pieces next to it, they're all the same size. Set them aside to be scored. And then I have another set. These pieces are actually 2 1/2 inches wide, and we're going to trim this horizontally at 4 1/2 and 2 1/4. Take the 4 rectangles that are the same. Those are going to go in pocket C. Next, I have another set. This is also 2 1/2 inches wide. We're going to trim this just at 2 1/4. And this also goes in pocket C. This longer scrap here that fell off the end, that goes in pocket D, along with these other little strips that are left over going into pocket D, or you could circular file them, absolutely. Now that completes the first trimming diagram for the red and dark green paper. Now we're going to move on to the orange and light green papers, and once again the arrow has us pointing left to right, so when you check the grain, make sure the paper droops easily from left to right, and the same for this light green. Nice easy dip going this way. So this at the same time we'll cut at 11 1/2 and 7. Rotate that 7-inch piece and we'll cut at 10 and 5. Okay, now these 4 pieces, pocket B, these are actually going to nest with the ones that we placed in there originally, so that's kind of cool. I'll get 2 sets of nesting panels going in there. And then I think I do end up using these, but I'm going to plop them in D for now because I didn't have a specific assignment for them. Now this next piece, 4 1/2 by 12 right now, we're going to trim it at 8 and 4. The set in the base and another set right next to it. They should be 4 the same. Those get set aside to be scored. And that final one actually goes in pocket D because I don't have a specific home for it, along with the 2 strips that remain. Now, if my pace is overwhelming you a little bit, feel free to adjust the playback speed on your YouTube channel by clicking on the gear button and adjusting the playback speed to like 0.75 or even 0.5 will be very slow, but maybe more manageable for you. Now we're going to follow the next cutting diagram 2 times through with 2 sheets of paper each time. So here's the ivory that's listed in the diagram, and we want it dipping easily with grain going top to bottom. So check that. And then I'm going to take the dark green, checking my grain. I want it dipping top to bottom. So it's different than the previous 2. And it's because we'll be folding the paper in that direction in the future. I'm going to trim at 11 3/4 and 8 1/2. Now rotate that 8.5 inch piece. We'll cut at 10 1/4 and 3 1/4. Now rotate the 3 1/4 inch piece and cut at 8 1/4. Okay, so this is a panel used in set C, the slim line. We did create 2 small scraps, so get rid of those. The larger piece that you created gets set aside to be scored. The strip is used in C. And then we have this long piece here. Go ahead and trim that at 8 3/4 and 4 1/4. Now rotate the 4 1/4 inch piece, so it's now vertical, and trim at 2 3/4. Okay, so this narrow piece, pocket B, and then the next pair of rectangles also goes in B, and then you have some squarish size, those go in D, and you can choose to maybe dispose of these little guys, and if you want to keep the narrow strips, I like to use those sometimes. And we get to repeat all of that one more time. So again, the orange dipping north to south, and light green also north to south. Okay, repeat. 11 3/4 and 8 1/2. Rotate. Trim at 10 1/4 and 3 1/4. Rotate. 8 1/4. This one, pocket C. Here we have some scraps I'm going to throw away. These 2 pieces become cards and they get scored, so set those aside. Don't file them quite yet. Pocket C. This piece will trim 8 3/4, 4 1/4. Rotate 2 3/4. Pocket B. You create a lot of pieces for pocket B, but it's a super cool card structure. This is a scrap. Also pocket B, and then the squarish rectangular piece is pocket D, along with our little narrow strips. All right, that's it for that diagram. Now the cool part is, so far we've only used plain sheets of paper. So if you like the structures that this makes, you can create them with papers from your stash. And I just know most of us have a stash. We accept that, we understand that. The grain of the ivory needs to dip left to right. Same with the red next in our pile, so dipping left to right. Again, that pertains to the future folds we'll be making. Our first cut here is at 11 1/2. And then 9. Rotate and trim at 11. And 5 1/2. Gather up all 4 of the like size larger panels here. Those are going to be scored later, so set them aside. This goes in pocket D. And then we have the narrow strips here. We're going to trim this at 8 1/4 and 4 1/2. Now this last piece actually goes in pocket D, and then these other 4 pieces the same, pocket A. I think that's the first thing we've put in there. And then we've got some strips here for pocket D for decorating later on. All right, now the print, the first one, because you have 2 of them, the first one is trimmed where the panels don't get folded. So you can just choose any direction, and really with an all over print like this, the direction doesn't even matter. We'll cut at 8 and then rotate the 8-inch piece and trim at 9, 6, and 3. Gather up all of these 30 by 8-inch panels. Those go in pocket C. And believe it or not, I didn't use this strip, so you can decide if you would like to include that in some of your cards on the inside, perhaps. There's a lot going on with these cards, so I just didn't really need it. Now this next piece I'm going to cut at 10.5. Again, the grain direction doesn't matter. And 5.25. Now rotate. We'll cut at 11. 10.25. 9.5. 8.75. 8. 6. And 4. And 2. Lots and lots of cuts. Okay, now we said I hadn't put much into pocket A. First of all, you're going to find 4 rectangles that are the same size, pocket A. Then you're going to find 4 strips that are the same size. These are only 3/4 of an inch wide, and then there's one that's a little wider than that. So the 4 that are the same, pocket A, and the wider strip, D. This next piece, this is currently 5.25 by 12. We'll cut this one at 10.25, 8.5, 6.75, and 5. This larger piece is actually another scrap. We're using all 4 pieces that are the same in pocket A. And then this is also a scrap. And we can use all those pieces, but I just don't have them officially designated. That can be, you know, designer's choice. Okay, now here we are at the cut aparts. And if you look on page 3 of your instructions, I show a visual, kind of a screen back visual of the cut apart we're working on, which pocket each piece belongs to. So we first, however, need to remove the outside perimeter. So if you can see that on the screen, the little hash marks there in the corner, that's actually a cutting guide. So if you line up the gray mark with the outside edge of your blade on your trimmer, that will take off about 1/8 of an inch. And you want to do that around the entire perimeter of the cut apart as accurately as you can. So just keep working your way around. By this time now, on this turn, I can see that I have a 12-inch piece of paper that I'm going to want to start with. And our 5 piece here, and all of these little 1/8-inch scraps can be thrown away. When we start to trim this officially now, I want to make sure that I was rooting for you is on the right. And we are going to trim a really weird measurement to make all of this work perfectly. It has more to do with these little pieces down over here to fit on the correct measurement, which is not our favorite. We fall into the 1/8 inch category here. So we're going to trim the first cut at 9 3/8. Now, for many of you are like, yeah, no problem. But for some of you, if you feel a little apprehensive about those eighths, I know a lot of you do, 9 3/8 lands halfway between 9.25 and 9.5. So there's that mid-size hash mark in there. So first find 9.25 and then go halfway to 9.5, and that puts you at 9 3/8. Visually, if I look over here, I can see that I'm gonna, my cut is gonna perfectly separate these innies, and that's all there is to it. Now the next cut's nice and easy at 8.25, and then 4. Okay, now a rotation here, and we'll trim at 10, 7.5, 5, and 2.5. Okay, that gives me these sentiments for card set B. So make sure you grab all of the same size, and plus I believe I used the hot stuff in card set B as well. Pop it in there. Now next, we're going to trim these at 9, 6, and 3. All the numbers divisible by 3. 9, 6, and 3. And gather all of those going into B also, pocket B. Then we have this cute little guy. Now, we have tons of little cuts to make down here at the end. And It's not too bad though. Just follow along with me. Our first cut is at 11 5/8. So that's halfway between 11 1/2 and 11 3/4 is 11 5/8. Then 11 1/4. Then 10 7/8. Again, that's halfway between 10 3/4 and 11. So you're getting an exercise in measuring here. Otherwise, just eyeball it. And then 10 1/2. Now, so we don't lose track of them, maybe right now would be a good time to place all of these pieces into pocket B. Okay, now we'll proceed with finishing up the trims on this. Our next cut will be at 9, then 7 1/2, 6, and 4 1/2. Okay, so this 2 peas in a pod thing here, I believe I used that in set B. And then the happy birthdays and you are amazing, all of that goes in set A. And next we'll just trim this last strip in half at 6. So after all that hard stuff, we get to do something easy and file both of those into pocket C. Finally, we have arrived at the very last cut apart. The same drill applies. We're gonna line up that crosshairs there with the edge of the blade and carefully trim the perimeter of this until we create a nice 12 by 12. Okay, we want to begin with all of these little strips in the lower left corner, pumpkin in the lower left, this on the lower right, yes. Okay, we are going to remove a small scrap here, so our first cut's kind of weird. It's going to be at 11 3/4. And then 8, 5 3/4, and 3 1/2. Rotate. Our first cut is at 9. That takes the pumpkin off the right edge, so make sure the pumpkin's on the right. 6 3/4, 4 1/2, and 2 1/4. Okay, we have 4 rectangular sentiments or images. Put those in pocket A, and I believe I used the pumpkin in set C. Okay, now this next one, we're going to trim, this is so nice and easy, all the even numbers. So just go ahead and do 10, 8, 6, 4, and 2. How nice is that? All of this goes in pocket C. Next one again, same thing, all the even numbers. So 10, 8, 6, 4, and 2. Lovely. Pocket C. These are 3/4 of an inch wide, so our first cut's at 11 1/4, 10 1/2, 9 3/4, 9, 6 1/4, 3 1/2. I used the truck in pocket C and then this in B. And finally, we'll file up these happy birthday to you, and you've got a big heart inside, C. These really skinny guys, A, all of them. That concludes the trimming. Hallelujah. Now it's time to score. I've picked up all of the papers in the order that they landed, and we're going to work backwards now in our instructions. I find everything that needs to be scored and then grab the measurements from usually the last sentence I've shared, and I can file them accordingly. So with this red, this is a 5 1/2 by 9 inch piece right now. We'll score horizontally at 4 1/4, 5 1/4, 7 1/4, and 8 1/4. Repeat that for the ivory. 4 1/4, 5 1/4, 7 1/4, 8 1/4. And then you got 2 more pieces. Do the same thing. All 4 of these pieces can go in pocket A. Next we'll work with the, these are 7 by 8.5. These are going to be the slimline cards. Since they can look quite square, just make sure that when you place this vertically into the trimmer, the number 7 is here and the number 8.5 is down over here. So this is the vertical score at 3.5. Repeat for the orange. And then when you score the dark green, just make sure the burlap texture is facing up at 3.5, and then the ivory at 3.5. These are the card bases for set C. Now these next pieces aren't quite square. They're 4.5 by 4. So this time we're going to score horizontally at 2 3/4 and 3 3/4. Repeat for all the pieces, 2 3/4, 3 3/4, and make sure the 4.5-inch side is aligned with your scoring line. These will be filed in pocket A. And now for the final strips, these measure 3 by 5 1/4. We'll score horizontally at 2 1/4, texture side up, and 4 5/8. Again, I apologize, but to find 5/8, go to 4.5, and then it's 1 notch to the right is 4 5/8. All of these pieces can be filed in pocket B, and you can set your score pile aside. Next, take everything out of pocket A and start to sort the pieces out by size. Okay, so I have everything sorted, and I'm going to begin by distributing the largest pieces first. So that will be the 2 red card bases that are scored, and then the 2 ivory. So let's just distribute all the pieces to the appropriate cards so you can have your assignments for every piece. Then we have the other next largest scored piece. So the light green is going to go with the red, and this is just my suggestion. You, of course, can swap out the colors any way you wish, and then the 2 orange will go with the ivory. Next, we'll have a ivory panel going onto the light green scored piece, and then we'll bring the red over here. Okay, then I have a series of these strips. These are the widest strips. Each card will get 1. Deal them out. Then I have some medium strips. Each card gets 1. I bet you can guess what's going to happen next. Narrow strips. Each card gets 1. Then you have this little sentiment wishing you a day of happy moments. So each one of those gets a sentiment. Sending upbeat vibes. Both of those will go with the red, and then the corn will go with onto the white card bases. Happy birthday will go with the upbeat vibes, and then you are amazing. It goes with the corn, obviously. Now from your goodie pile, you should have a set of 4 wood tags. Put 1 on each card. Now all the pieces are distributed to the appropriate card, so what we'll do, and this is tradition, since each card gets assembled the same exact way, I'm going to stack the 3 flavors up and keep 1 out. This is the one we'll make together. The rest, like I said, go together the same way. I think a good start is to fold along the score lines that we've made. Now, just because you've scored doesn't mean you should trust every score implicitly. Just as you're scoring, make sure the paper is nice and level. And in your kit, we have given you one of these needle tip glue applicators, and one of the reasons I gave it to you again is because if you don't have one already, you need to have one of these. It's just a wonderful way to apply glue. It's efficient. It uses less glue. I'm going to be using my black one. The color of the applicator doesn't matter. Mine's filled with bookbinding glue, so if you don't have bookbinding glue, you'll need to pick up some of that, but it's just a great way to dispense it. Okay, so here we go. This is what we're after, and I always say this reminds me of when you go to the store and you buy a box of chapstick. It's usually inside. It's like packaging, right? 3D packaging. This sits and there's like a hanger card here, right? And then you pick it up off the shelf and the product is inside. So the goal here is to have a perfect rectangle formed by this card. But when it's flat, then you can mail this piece. So what you kind of have to do is just devote a little study to where to place that tab. We're going to glue it onto the back wall, and we want it glued so that the card mails flat and then it pops up for display. So here's what I'm going to do. Now that I have it positioned, this is the flat version. This is the dimensional version. I'm just going to remember that. Open the card, and I'm going to apply adhesive to this This is the end flap, the very last tab of the card. And you can use your ATG if you want, or you can use your glue applicator. Now all I have to do, this is the very last score line, is to fold on the score line. And wherever that lands, it's going to give me that perfect rectangle when the card is open. Just give it a second to dry. I mean, it doesn't take long. And now I have my perfect rectangle. Card's flat, perfect rectangle. You just have to make sure you glue this at the right spot. And now basically the card takes perfect shape. We're going to place a printed panel onto all the appropriate sections of the card. So do you see how this printed panel fits in this spot? The medium one fits in this spot, and then the narrow one fits in this one. So it's all been pre-cut, and I know that the trimming can be kind of arduous, but in the end, it just saves us so much time. We did all the trimming needed to put panels on all 4 of the cards at once. So for this, I'll use my ATG style adhesive, and I'll center that within this area, and it fits perfectly, of course, because, you know, that's the way we planned it. And then I'll add some adhesive to the skinny piece. You can work on these cards assembly line style, so, you know, maybe have them all lined up, and you can be doing all these steps and pause me until it's done for all 4 cards, rather than just making one at a time. That adds to the efficiency. Okay, so now we have this other scored piece, and this is part of this pop-up that sort of gets attached. So the bumps of the score lines, I want to fold on them to make sure the bumps are on the inside of the fold. So we call that burying the bump. Now this is going to situate onto the card in a certain way, but what's important is that when the card is closed, that this panel doesn't extend beyond the right edge. I'm going to go ahead and use my ATG adhesive to put some ATG on the flap, and also some ATG. So here's the tab, and then here's the other side. So at this point, I can safely close this, go grab my card, and make sure that this flap is on the front and that this one is sort of on the back wall. And we want to install it centered, in this case top to bottom, so that the folded edge of this panel lines up with the mat on the back wall. That way we know that the card is going to look fabulous when it's open, and it won't extend past the edge of the card when it's closed, and it will fit perfectly into the envelope. I know that was a lot of explaining, but once you sort of get the idea about how this works, you can replicate the idea over and over again. At this point, I'm going to nest the Sending Upbeat Vibes onto a panel. My white work surface isn't the best for this. And then I'm going to add adhesive to the back of the ivory panel here and nest that onto the appropriate spot here. It fits perfectly. Then on the top edge of this piece, I can go ahead, put adhesive on that narrow sentiment. Make sure it reads right side up. That's going to go in place here. Isn't that cool how this is just all fitting really beautifully? Now we have the tag and we have the sentiment. If you happen to have a corner punch or a corner chomper, I'm going to use the 1/4 inch setting to round the bottom corners of the happy birthday sentiment, and then I'll adhere it to this cute little tag here. And it fits perfectly, straight edge at the top, rounded edge at the bottom. Lots of cleverness there on Jack's part, who helped design this collection. And now I'm going to thread some of this taffeta, this dark green taffeta ribbon, onto the tag and just tie a bow. We've included plenty of ribbon for you, and I try to use most, if not all of it, but sometimes there's some left over. I can't remember what I ended up with after creating the cards, but you should have plenty to not have to worry about running out. Now we've got a spot planned for this right here on the card base, so it can extend a little bit past the bottom edge if you want. There we go. So I'll just put some adhesive on this now that I've sort of tested it. And I'll add it to the card, making sure it doesn't extend beyond that last score line. Nice. There is my finished card, embellished, ready to go, ready to mail. So it mails flat and displays dimensional. Absolutely love this card style, and I've done it now in several different sizes, including 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. This is a newly engineered size. I really calculated a lot to see if I could get this to fit properly, and I'm so happy with the outcome. Let's take a look at the other cards in this set. Actually, you'll make a second card that is exactly the same as the first one. So two exactly, they're both horizontal, both with the upbeat vibes. Then you have the You're Amazing. And again, this goes together the same way, but the difference is orientation. This is going to be vertical. So just make sure this is facing correctly. Everything up to this, the paper assembly is the same. When you're adding the horizontal tag, however, it's going to peak quite a bit past that score line here. And that's totally okay, because when the card mails, it's flat. But what's cool is when it's open, it kind of pops out a little bit. And I really like that look. So just remember, you know, to just be testing your flat mailing situation and your display situation so that everything is positioned where you want it. You can consult the images in the instructions as well. But that concludes set A. So I'm going to put away all of these little pieces into an envelope and set them aside, and we'll move on to set B. After emptying the B pocket, you'll want to, again, go ahead and just sort everything out by size. And let's go ahead and distribute everything into a series of 4 cards. Once again, we'll have the orange first, and then the green. So this is card 1, 2, 3, 4. I have them listed vertically in my instructions, but the ability to see everything is easier when you do it this way. All right, then I have a dark green panel on this orange base, as well as on the other orange, and then a red panel. And again, this is just suggestions. I mean, I've gone through and tried to figure out the best synchronization of color, but you can do it however you want. It's definitely, you know, the world is your oyster. Then we have the scored panel in red on the green, and then vice versa. Okay, then we have these sort of larger panels. So I'm going to start out with a light green going here, ivory here, dark green here, and orange here. I know that there's 2 dark green, it's just couldn't be avoided. Then onto this red panel, I'll nest a dark green. Here I'll nest a light green, just trying to distribute the color as best as I can. Here we get a orange, and on this one, an ivory. Now you have these cool, beautiful images. I just love the colors here. We've got the truck on the first 2 cards, and then we have, let's see, we need the cauliflower here and the dill here. Okay, so you bring color to my life, here and here on the top. Then we say, if cauliflower can somehow become pizza, you can do anything along with your kind of a big dill. I love it. Okay, then I think on the second one, you color my life, I did add the hot stuff. And then on this last one, kind of a big deal, I added the 2 peas in a pod. Yeah, that was just at my own liberty, so do however you wish. Next, I'm going to distribute 2 of these little folding board pieces. These are going to grow up to become little stoppers for our card, our tent card shape. The first 2 happy birthdays go on the first 2 cards. Then along with the cauliflower, you've got thinking of you, and then with big dill, you've got this. So those are the pieces for each card, and as before, all the cards assemble the same way. I'll show you each of them individually on my completed samples, but let's just complete one together in the interest of time. One of the first things we can do here, and this is just to add a little bit of height to what will become the stopper on our tent card, is I'm going to distribute some of our bookbinding glue from the dispenser onto one piece of the folding board and then laminate it with another. And you'll have to forgive me if I depart a little from the order of the written instructions. Sometimes if you're following along with me, like I write the instructions to what I think is the best order assembly, but I don't always stop and read them when I'm doing it. But the order of assembly is kind of important on this particular card. Just be mindful of that. And then, and this again would be another great thing to do first for all the cards so that this step is done. So now the happy birthday is on my little, what will become the stopper. If you happen to have a crocodile, which I keep one right here, there's a smaller hole and a larger one. So I'm going to take this and punch a hole into each end of this little folding board strip to make it look more like a tag. And then if you really want to get fancy, take the, let's see, I wound this up, so how did I do it? Take some red jute. This is included in your kit. And I find it's just easier if you want to take 2 lengths right out of the gate. And there are 2 ways you can attach. You can just thread it one end at a time and tie a knot, or you can do luggage tag style. So you just take the looped end pull it out a little bit, and then just bring the tails through the loop. That way you don't have to tie any knots. That's one end. Do the same on the other. Great, and now I have this looped, and at this point I'm just going to take scissors and trim away most of the tails so we have a really attractive little embellishment. With that ready to go, we can now easily assemble the card. So I'm going to take, first of all, and this is so important, our temptation would be to nest this on here, but don't do that yet. Leave the orange out of it, okay? I'm going to start out with this green panel. I'm going to place it on the left side of this card so that it's centered top bottom and match the margin on the left edge. This has all been mathematically really carefully calculated, so it'll work. Okay, then you need to add, you can add this cute little panel right on top of it, so nest. And that's what's going to determine the spacing for this scored piece that we prepared earlier. So again, the bumps of the scores go on the insides of the fold. And what that gives us is like two paneled areas and then a flap. So the flap is going to hook onto the top edge of the card. Judge your distance left to right and split it. And it should line up pretty close to the bottom edge of your panel. That's where that goofy score measurement came in. It was just me thinking ahead. Okay, so I'm going to use my ATG to secure the flap. Now I can add this to my base. I'll add my ATG. If you don't have one of these, this is the quickest way to add adhesive to your cards. I carry them just as a matter of convenience, but definitely add that weapon to your arsenal, the ATG gun. Now, be really, really careful here. We can go ahead and nest the sentiment onto the panel, but when you attach the panel to the tent mechanism, you want to be sure that you don't put any adhesive in this area, within this scored area. If you do, when you open the card, this won't function in a pop-up style like we want it to, okay? So only apply your glue to the bottom half. I'm careful because there's going to be a margin here, right? Reveal. Now all I have to do with the adhesive on the bottom of that section is center my panel the way I want it. I'm just checking for margin left, right, and bottom. And then that will pop up perfectly. But what keeps it from falling down, it's the custom stopper that we made earlier. Okay, so I'm just going to put some bookbinding glue on the back of this. And because we laminated it, it's a double thickness and it's going to give us what we need to hold it up. So I'll just eyeball the center here. This is where I want this to stick. And the reason I use my wet glue there is it'll allow for little adjustments. Unlike the ATG, it's like one and done. And also it's just a smaller object. And when I'm gluing smaller objects, paper to paper, metal on paper, that's when I use the ink or the needle tip applicator with our bookbinding glue. So that's just a super sweet card. The finishing touch then is a bow made with this beautiful double-faced satin ribbon. Before I make my bow, I always check to make sure the grain direction of the ribbon is rounding away correctly. So if I hold the ribbon by an end, you can see how it curls in. If I hold it the other way, it bobs out. I want it curling in when I make my bunny ears. I do have a whole video about using ribbon on your cards and pages, and you can tune into that. It's at clubscrap.com/pages/ribbon. So I have the two bunny ears crisscross, run the front ear around the back and through the hole, and pull. Then it's a matter of shaping your bow. And then I'll fold this lengthwise and trim at an angle toward the knot to make the pretty little swallow's tail. Same here. You can always adjust the length if you want. And I use a glue line typically. This is basically a nice dry two-way adhesive that works well for dimensional objects. So I usually put it on the back side or the ugliest side of my bow, and there always is an uglier side. And then I will attach it to this area, and that gives me a spot on which to write a little note. And when it pops up, This is really sweet. It's really pretty. Isn't that fun? I hope you like this card. I love this structure. It's step intensive, but the results are great, and it pulls together quick when you make 4 at a time. So this is the one that we made together, or this is the next one. But look at how I used the hot stuff. Now, this is in your series here of your items. So the hot stuff, just trim around it. There's like an outline you can follow. It looks pretty great. So you can choose to use that or not. So this is the one we made together. Then we've got if cauliflower, thinking of you here. Again, assembles the same way. On the kind of a big dill, I added the peas in a pod. So again, that was just my choice. You can omit that stuff if you prefer. And that concludes set B. So I'm going to put all this away, get organized, take everything out of pocket C, and organize it according to size. All right, next up, I've got everything sorted here. And let's distribute our card bases first. So the light green looks like it's our first card. And I'll do this horizontally just so that it's a little easier to fit on my screen. We've got the light green and then ivory. On the vertical cards, we'll do orange and dark green. Okay, next we have some nesting panels. So it looks like we're going to nest orange on this one and light green on this one. And then dark green on the orange and ivory on the dark green. So I hope that wasn't too confusing. Next, I'll take the printed panels. They're 4 the same. Those will just get distributed nice and easy. Now on this card, on the inside, I'm going to add a dark green strip as an anchor. Here I'll add an orange strip. This again will be on the inside, so you can't see it very well on the instructions. And then we have an ivory strip here, and finally the light green strip here. Now from pocket D, I went ahead and got one of these scraps. This is, I believe, a 9-inch scrap. So it's white and then red. I'm just going to use those on the horizontal cards, and that's completely optional. It's just something that I could do. Next, you have this whole series of all these little rectangles. So 3 green, going to be in pairs. 3 green goes on this one, and 3 green on the other horizontal. Everything's planned. Planning. Now red goes on each one of these. All right, now we have to sort out all of these graphic images, so just bear with me. The 2 radishes on the top of my pile, I'm not sure what you have, but if you can just compare, this is an old-fashioned way of texting, and then there's some little carrots here. So that's this one in the lower corner. It just kind of varies how they were trimmed and filed. Lettuce celery braid goes on this one along with the lettuce and the celery. That's kind of easy, right? Now we've got some garlics and onions. We have some tomatoes, and we have a whole assortment of veggies will be here, and you can just use the rest on that one. And of course, this is all like, we know these are going to be horizontal and these are going to be vertical orientation. So it just is whatever speaks to you. You can arrange these however you wish, but this is just the suggested, and you should be able to identify everything from looking at the pictures of the instructions. So as before, the cards assemble the same exact way. I'm going to set aside card 2, 3, and 4 in this set, and we'll do this light green one together. If you happen to have our rulers, this is a handy time to have one on hand, just because we're working with a larger nesting mats, and sometimes it's nice to be able to align them. So go ahead and start out by finding the bump of the score line and putting that on the inside of your fold, and just check those edges. Never trust a score line. And if you want to use a bone folder to hold that longer piece closed, that's fine. Now, because we trim this paper with the grain direction, it's going to fold together nice and easily. Next, we can go ahead and add the orange panel to the light green panel with our favorite adhesive, and just center that on there. Again, if you wanted to use a ruler, this is a nice narrow margin, though it's working pretty well. And then this next one, this is the printed panel. Don't have to worry about any ribbons or anything getting attached at a weird time here, so that can just nest. Now I went ahead and trimmed this to 8 inches wide. So if you want to use this strip down the middle, you'll need to trim the length a little bit, just to 8 inches. I think you're just removing 1 inch. And we just want to make sure that this is level before we adhere it. So now we have these 3 squares and we can decide what artwork goes on what and in which direction. So first I'll adhere the artwork to the dark green panels. And then I'm going to add some foam adhesive to this. Now that's all completely optional as well. When I use my foam adhesive circles, I cut them in half, and that way I can have them go a little further, and I can just put one in each corner so I have some nice stability there. After having all of those pieces applied, I like to take tweezers and just remove the backing. You can do this with your fingers quite easily too, but this makes it go even faster. Now I'm going to take the 0 center of my grid ruler and place it so that I'm looking at this veggie panel, and I want the number 4 to be the reading on the left and the right, and I want to be 2 cubes or 1/4 of an inch from the bottom edge of that panel. And now I know that where the center is. So I'm going to take the center panel or the middle panel rather, and center it. And it looks like we're going to be placing this at 1 1/8 from the center on each side. So that's where this comes in so handy. You can really accurately place, whereas eyeballing it just doesn't give you the most accurate result. Then I'm going to allow 1/8 of an inch between the previous one and this one. That puts me at 3.5 inches on this side, and I can match that on this side. 3.5 inches is my reading right there. And now I've got everything beautifully placed on my card, nice and centered, nice and level, equally spaced, top to bottom as well as left to right. Okay, so for the inside, I'm going to take this long strip and place it across the bottom edge here. Now I have the option of going into my bin of scraps, and I happen to have all these nice big pieces. So I thought, well, maybe. So I'm going to trim this down to 8.5 inches, and that seems to fit perfectly. So I'll go ahead and glue this in place. And again, you can do whatever you want. You can take that other larger piece and divide that up into little strips as well to go on the insides of your cards. You have plenty of leftover paper to work with. I normally don't have quite so much scrap. Okay, then we can take our little car, and we see the outline that we have there. So just take any kind of a fussy cut scissors, your favorite scissors, and just cut around the edge of the guideline. For the inside, we're going to use Let Our Lives Be Full of Thanks and Giving. So we'll add this, and then maybe add the car right next to that. Oh, that's so sweet, isn't it? I just love this and how simple it all came together. Finally, last but not least, if you want, take some of the jute and thread it onto one of those sunflower charms. Make sure you leave enough of a tail that you can perhaps make a small bow if you have the patience for it. And you know, these small bows are basically a matter of just shortening. No matter how tiny your hands are or large your hands are, you can make a tiny, tiny bow by simply shortening and pulling. And then I really don't have a lot of patience for bows, but I've kind of figured it out. Now that's why I saved this for last. The last thing you want to do is attach a sunflower. Maybe we could put it here or right in the middle. I don't know. World's your oyster. Guess what I'm going to use to attach this? Yes, my trusty bookbinding glue from the needle tip applicator. And I'll add it right here. And that's why you want to set it aside to dry. Once it's dry, that little charm's not going anywhere. So I can show you on my original. I guess I added it to the center, but that's on there beautifully. So trust the glue, give it a chance to dry, and you'll be just fine. So now you can see the inside of this one. Oh, I added a couple of strips here. I mean, each one will vary, right? It's artistry at work. Here's the other horizontal in the set. I used the That's Rad. I think I had originally put it in pocket B, but I did use it on the C with the We Can Beat This. I think it's just really, I love the puns. They're really fun. And here is one of the vertical cards. So again, these aren't quite square, so you'll just have to be aware of your orientation when you're adding these elements to the card. There's the charm. So each card was finished with the charm with the bow glued in place. And the inside on this one, I used more scraps, did some nesting. I think I cut this into narrow strips, and you've got a big heart inside. That's so clever. And then lettuce, celery braid, put the charm down here. And on the inside of this one, I added the big pumpkin, some more nests, and some strips. This was one of those little 1/4-inch strips I used to add even more color. I just love, you know, when you do have a couple of scraps to work with, you can really do a lot on these slimline sized cards. Add a lot to the inside. A lot of real estate there to decorate. Okay, that concludes, wow, I made a mess here, concludes our card making session with the Farmstand kit. If you like this kit, maybe you have a garden or know someone who loves to garden, be sure to pick up our Farmstand page kit and take that class with me as well. We're gonna have a good time putting 8 pages together, so I'll see you over there, and if not, I'll see you back here next month. Thanks for joining me.